I want you to sit with me for a moment. I want you to remember how sacred a wedding feels, the promises, the prayers, the way family gathers close like a shield around your future. That day, I believed I was walking into forever with a good man and a loyal sister by my side. I believed love was loud and betrayal was obvious. I was wrong. Today I'm telling this story not for pity, not for revenge, but for truth, because some lessons only come wrapped in heartbreak, and some strength is born the moment your illusion shatters. I used to believe closeness meant safety. I believed that the people who knew my childhood stories, my fears, my laughter were the same people who would never hurt me. My sister had been beside me since the beginning. She knew the sound of my cry before words existed. She knew how I loved hard and forgave fast. My husband came later, but I gave him the same access. I opened my heart wide and invited him into every corner of my life. What I did not understand then is that proximity gives opportunity and opportunity tests character. Sometimes the people closest to you do not protect you. Sometimes they learn you. They study your blind spots. They learn how to move around your trust without disturbing it. Before I ever suspected anything, they already knew. They knew before the vows were spoken. They knew before the dress was altered. They knew before the invitations were sent. I was standing in hope while they were standing in secrecy. I was dreaming out loud while they were whispering behind closed doors. And the cruelest part of it all was that they watched me smile. They watched me plan. They watched me believe. They carried the truth in their bodies while letting me carry a lie in my heart. My sister looked me in the eyes every day. She listened to me talk about my future. She nodded when I spoke about love and commitment and forever. She hugged me when wedding stress made me cry. She reassured me when doubt flickered across my face. And all the while she knew. She knew the man I was promising my life to was already breaking it. She knew the foundation I was standing on was cracked. She knew, and she stayed silent. That silence was not protection. It was betrayal with a calm face. There is a special kind of pain that comes from realizing the people closest to you were holding the truth hostage. It is not loud pain. It is quiet and deep and suffocating. It makes you question your memories. It makes you replay conversations in your head searching for clues you missed. It makes you wonder how long you were the only honest person in the room. I remember thinking back to moments that once felt ordinary. The shared laughter, the long talks, the casual touches. Suddenly they all felt contaminated. Like the truth had been hiding inside them all along. Trust is not something you give once. It is something you give daily through small acts of faith. I trusted them every day without hesitation. I trusted my sister to guard my heart. I trusted my husband to honor it. And while I was giving trust freely, they were trading secrets. They were sharing moments that should have belonged to me. They were building a connection in the dark while I was building a future in the light. That realization changed how I understood closeness forever. The truth is, people close to you have the greatest power to hurt you because they have access. They know your schedule. They know your habits. They know when you are vulnerable and when you are distracted. They know which lies will sound believable and which truths you will never question. My sister knew I would never suspect her. She knew blood would blind me. My husband knew love would soften me. Together they relied on my faith in them to hide their wrongdoing. When I look back, I see how carefully they moved, how nothing ever felt obvious, how betrayal does not always announce itself with red flags and warning signs. Sometimes it wears familiarity, sometimes it sounds like concern, sometimes it looks like loyalty, and because of that it is easy to miss. I was not stupid. I was trusting. I was not careless. I was open, and openness without discernment can leave you exposed. Knowing they knew before I did hurt more than the affair itself. Because it meant there was a window of time where they could have chosen differently. A moment where honesty could have saved me. A chance to stop the wedding. A chance to spare me public vows and private humiliation. But they chose themselves instead. They chose comfort over conscience. Desire over decency, and that choice was made repeatedly every time they saw me and said nothing. I often think about my sister sitting with that knowledge, carrying it into rooms where I laughed, carrying it into conversations where I trusted her advice, carrying it into my wedding day where she cried. Those tears were heavy with secrets. She was grieving something she already had, and I was celebrating something that was already gone. That imbalance is what makes betrayal so devastating. One person is living in truth while the other is living in illusion. There is a moment after betrayal where you realize your innocence was taken without your consent. Not innocence in the childish sense, but innocence in the belief that love and loyalty are guaranteed. I lost that belief. I learned that closeness does not equal safety. That history does not equal honesty. That shared blood and shared beds do not equal integrity. People can know everything about you and still choose to harm you. But there is another truth that emerged from that pain. If they could know the truth before I did, then I could learn to know myself better after. I could learn to listen to my intuition instead of dismissing it. I could learn to ask questions even when the answers scare me. I could learn to protect my heart without hardening it. Their secrecy taught me awareness. Their betrayal taught me boundaries. I stopped blaming myself for not knowing sooner. Because knowledge withheld is not ignorance. It is deception. I did the best I could with the information I was given. And they controlled that information. They controlled the narrative. They controlled the timing. But they could not control my healing. The people closest to you may know the truth before you do. But that does not mean they get to define your future. It means you get to redefine your standards. It means you get to choose who earns access to your life moving forward. It means you get to rebuild trust slowly, intentionally, and wisely. I learned that trust should be earned through consistency, not assumed through proximity. I learned that love without honesty is not love at all. And I learned that sometimes the most painful awakenings lead to the strongest versions of ourselves. Even now when I think about that time, there is sadness. But there is also clarity. I see myself standing in hope, unaware of the storm behind me. And I do not judge her. I honor her, because she loved with a full heart. And that was never her mistake. The mistake was theirs for abusing the closeness they were given. The truth eventually found its way to me, as it always does. And when it did, it brought devastation, yes, but also liberation. Because once you know you are no longer trapped in a lie. Once you know you can choose yourself. Once you know you can walk away with your dignity intact. Sometimes the people closest to you know the truth before you do. And sometimes that truth breaks you. But sometimes it also builds you into someone who will never ignore herself again. Betrayal rarely walks into your life looking like an enemy. It does not always shout or slam doors or leave bruises you can point to. Sometimes it sits beside you quietly with a concerned tone and a gentle face. Sometimes it asks how you are feeling and offers advice that sounds reasonable and loving. I learned the hard way that betrayal can dress itself up as care, and that disguise is what makes it so dangerous. When someone betrays you while pretending to protect you, the confusion cuts deeper than anger ever could. My sister was always asking questions. She wanted to know how things were going between me and my husband. She asked if I was happy, if I felt supported, if I felt seen. At the time it felt like concern. It felt like a sister wanting the best for me. I did not hear the warning bells because the question sounded familiar and safe. What I did not understand then was that concern can be used as a cover. Questions can be tools. Information can be gathered under the mask of love. She would say things like, take care of yourself, or make sure he appreciates you, or do not let wedding stress get to you. Her words felt nurturing. Her presence felt steady. And all the while she was learning my emotional temperature. She was checking how close I was to the truth. She was measuring how much I trusted him. Betrayal often studies you before it harms you. It listens carefully. It waits patiently. It learns where you are strongest and where you are blind. My husband did the same thing in his own way. He would ask if I felt secure in our relationship. He would reassure me without being asked. He would tell me I was his priority. He used affection as insulation. He used reassurance to quiet any doubts before they could form. Betrayal knows how to calm you just enough to keep you from looking too closely. It knows how to sound sincere while hiding deceit underneath. Looking back, I see how often concern was used to redirect me. If I questioned something, my sister would gently suggest I was overthinking. If I felt uneasy, my husband would remind me how much stress I was under. They framed my instincts as anxiety and my awareness as imagination. That is how betrayal keeps its cover. It makes you doubt yourself. It convinces you that your inner voice is the problem, not their behavior. There is something especially painful about realizing the person comforting you is also the person causing the pain. It creates a kind of emotional disorientation. You do not know where to place your trust because the source of safety and the source of harm are the same. My sister would hug me when I felt overwhelmed. She would tell me everything was fine. She would tell me I was loved. And I believed her because who expects harm from someone offering comfort? Betrayal disguised as concern thrives on your vulnerability. It appears when you are tired, distracted, hopeful, or emotionally open. It shows up when your guard is down and your heart is exposed. I was planning a wedding. I was focused on building a future. I was not looking for danger. And because I was not looking, I did not see it. Concern was the perfect disguise because it fit naturally into the role they already played in my life. Sometimes concern sounded like advice. My sister would suggest ways to keep the peace or avoid conflict. She would encourage patience and understanding. On the surface it looked like wisdom. In reality it kept me quiet. It kept me from asking hard questions. It kept me from noticing inconsistencies. Betrayal does not always push you away. Sometimes it pulls you closer while steering you off course. I remember moments where something felt slightly off but was quickly smoothed over by reassurance. A look exchanged between them that I brushed aside. A conversation that stopped when I entered the room. That I explained away. Concern helped me justify what my intuition was trying to flag. When the people you trust tell you there is nothing to worry about, you believe them. Especially when they say it with warmth and familiarity. The hardest part is accepting that concern can be strategic. That someone can care about how you feel while still choosing to hurt you. That someone can comfort you without stopping the harm. I had to sit with the truth that my sister did not want to see me devastated, yet she did nothing to prevent it. Her concern was real, but it was not strong enough to override her choices. That contradiction is what makes betrayal so confusing. Betrayal disguised as concern also protects itself by appearing reasonable. If I expressed frustration, my sister would say relationships are hard. If I mentioned a strange feeling, she would say marriage requires trust. These statements were not wrong. That is what made them effective. Truth can be weaponized when it is used to hide a lie. The most convincing betrayals use partial truths to mask the whole deception. My husband would frame his behavior as thoughtfulness. He would explain away absences with work or stress. He would emphasize how much pressure he was under. Concern for his well-being became a distraction from questioning his actions. Betrayal often invites your empathy so you will stop investigating. It makes you feel guilty for doubting. It flips the narrative until you are protecting the very person deceiving you. There is a moment when you finally see through the disguise and it feels like the world tilts. You realize the comfort was calculated. The reassurance was rehearsed. The concern was a shield. That realization hurts because it rewrites your memories. What once felt safe now feels manipulative. What once felt loving now feels strategic. You grieve not only the betrayal but the loss of trust in your own perceptions. After the truth came out, I replayed countless interactions in my mind. I saw how concern had been used to manage me, to keep me calm, to keep me unaware, and I had to forgive myself for believing it. Because believing care is not foolish. It is human. The fault does not lie with the one who trusted. It lies with the one who exploited that trust. Betrayal disguised as concern teaches a harsh lesson about discernment. It teaches you to listen not only to words but to patterns. It teaches you that genuine concern aligns with honesty. Real care does not require secrecy. True love does not need deception to survive. When concern asks you to ignore your instincts, it is no longer concern. It is control. I learned to separate comfort from truth. I learned that someone can make you feel better while making your life worse. I learned that reassurance without accountability is hollow. These lessons came at a high cost, but they reshaped how I protect my heart. I no longer accept concern that silences me. I no longer trust comfort that asks me to look away. The disguise eventually falls. It always does. Concern cannot hide betrayal forever because truth has a way of surfacing. When it does, the pain is sharp but clarity follows. You see who stood with you and who stood in your way. You see who cared enough to be honest and who cared only enough to keep you calm. Betrayal disguised as concern taught me that love should never make you smaller. It should never ask you to doubt yourself. It should never require you to ignore what you feel deep inside. Real concern empowers you to see clearly even when the truth is uncomfortable. Anything less is not protection. It is betrayal wearing a gentle face. The truth has a way of breathing even when it is buried. It does not stay quiet forever no matter how carefully someone tries to hide it. I learned that slowly, painfully, and without warning. The truth did not arrive like a thunderclap. It did not come with shouting or dramatic confessions. It slipped into my life through small cracks and subtle shifts that I could not fully explain at first. And that is how truth often works. It does not rush. It waits until it can no longer be contained. There were moments that felt slightly off but not alarming enough to confront. A pause that lasted too long. A look that lingered where it should not have. A change in energy when I entered a room. These moments stacked quietly one on top of the other. Each one alone seemed harmless. Together they formed a weight I could feel but not yet name. I tried to push that feeling aside because believing the truth would have meant accepting something I was not ready to face. The people hiding the truth were careful. They were disciplined. They were intentional. They covered their tracks with routine and normalcy. They spoke casually. They laughed easily. They acted as if nothing was wrong. That is the dangerous part about buried truth. It can live comfortably among lies for a long time. It can blend into everyday life until you almost forget it exists. Almost. What I did not realize then was that truth does not need an invitation to surface. It moves on its own time. It finds the weakest point in the lie and presses there. It leaks through tone, through timing, through absence, through excess. It shows up in the way people avoid eye contact or offer too many explanations. It shows up in the silence that follows a question that should have been easy to answer. I remember the first real crack. It was not dramatic. It was a feeling that settled in my chest and refused to leave. A sense that something important was happening without me. That I was standing in the middle of my own life without full access to it. That feeling stayed with me even when I tried to ignore it. It followed me into quiet moments and sleepless nights. It whispered when everything else was silent. The truth began to reveal itself through inconsistencies. Stories that did not line up. Timelines that shifted. Details that changed depending on who was speaking. I noticed how explanations felt rehearsed. How answers arrived too quickly or too defensively. My mind started to connect dots my heart had been afraid to acknowledge. And once that process starts, it does not stop. Truth recognition is irreversible. There is a moment when suspicion turns into knowing. It is a heavy moment. It feels like the air leaves your body. Your stomach drops. Your vision narrows. You realize that what you feared is real and that there is no going back to not knowing. That moment arrived for me quietly but with devastating force. I did not scream. I did not cry at first. I felt frozen as if my body needed time to catch up with my mind. When the truth finally stood in front of me, there was no denying it. Evidence lined up too clearly. Behavior made sense in a way it never had before. Past moments rearranged themselves into a new picture that was impossible to ignore. The truth did not ask permission. It took its place and demanded to be seen. What hurt most was not just what the truth revealed but how long it had been hidden. I realized there had been a version of reality that everyone else was living except me. Conversations had happened without my knowledge. Decisions had been made without my consent. And I had been the only one standing in honesty while others moved in secrecy. That realization was suffocating. The truth carries a strange duality. It devastates and it clarifies at the same time. As painful as it was to see everything clearly, I also felt something shift inside me. The confusion that had haunted me dissolved. The anxiety that had no name finally made sense. The truth hurt, but it also answered questions I had been asking without words. People often say they want the truth, but what they really want is comfort. The truth offers no comfort at first. It strips away illusion and leaves you exposed. It forces you to confront reality without cushioning. When I learned the truth, I lost the story I had been telling myself about my life. I lost the version of love and family I believed I had. That loss was immense. But the truth also gave me something back. It gave me agency. It gave me the ability to choose with full information. It gave me the power to stop participating in a lie that was hurting me. Before the truth surfaced, I was trapped without knowing it. After it surfaced, I was hurt, but I was free. There was anger, yes. There was grief. There was disbelief. But beneath all of that there was clarity. I could finally see who people were rather than who I hoped they were. I could finally trust my instincts instead of questioning them. The truth validated every uneasy feeling I had tried to silence. The people who hid the truth could not stop it forever. No one ever can. Lies require constant maintenance. Truth requires none. Lies depend on memory coordination and control. Truth simply exists. Eventually the effort of hiding becomes heavier than the fear of exposure. And when that balance shifts, truth finds its way out. I learned that the truth does not always arrive in a way that feels fair. It does not consider timing or readiness. It arrives when it must. And when it does, it changes everything. Relationships shift. Perspectives realign. Identities reshape. You cannot unknow what you know. You cannot return to innocence once truth has opened your eyes. After the truth came out, I mourned the time I spent unaware. I mourned the trust I gave freely. I mourned the version of myself who believed she was safe. But I also honored her because she loved genuinely. She trusted openly. And that was never a flaw. The flaw was the deception she was subjected to. Truth has a way of demanding growth. It asks you to rise even when you are exhausted. It forces you to choose yourself even when it hurts. It does not allow you to stay comfortable in denial. And while that feels cruel in the moment, it becomes a gift over time. The truth surfaced and my life cracked open. But in that opening, light entered. Pain entered too, but pain with direction. Pain that moved me forward rather than keeping me stuck. I learned that truth may destroy what is false, but it cannot destroy what is real. What survived was my strength, my dignity, and my ability to rebuild. The truth will always surface no matter how buried. It waits patiently. It watches quietly. And when it emerges, it brings devastation and liberation in the same breath. I did not choose how I learned the truth, but I chose what I did with it. And that choice became the beginning of my healing. Grief does not always come dressed in black. It does not always arrive after a funeral or with condolences and casseroles. Sometimes grief shows up when the truth is revealed and the life you thought you were living collapses quietly around you. I learned that grief is not only about losing people. It is about losing illusions, losing safety, losing the future you planned in your mind and your heart. When the betrayal came to light, I did not just grieve a marriage or a sister. I grieved the story I believed about my life. There is a particular kind of grief that comes from deception. It is confusing because the people you are grieving are still alive. They are still walking around, breathing and speaking as if nothing has died. But something has died. Trust has died. Innocence has died. The version of love you believed in has died. And you are left mourning something invisible to everyone else. I remember waking up in the days after the truth came out feeling hollow. Not sad in a way that brought tears, but empty, as if something had been removed from me without anesthesia. The grief sat in my chest, heavy and unmoving. It followed me through ordinary tasks like a shadow. I would pour a cup of coffee and suddenly remember that the life I planned no longer existed. That realization hit me in waves throughout the day. Grief does not announce itself once. It returns again and again. What made this grief so heavy was the deception. I had been living inside a lie without knowing it. I had been making decisions based on information that was false. I had been loving people who were not being honest with me. That realization made me question everything. I questioned my memories, my instincts, my understanding of reality. Grief rooted in deception shakes your sense of self because it makes you wonder how you could have been so close and yet so unaware. I did not just grieve the loss of my husband as I thought I knew him. I grieved the loss of my sister as my safe place. She was no longer someone I could turn to without fear. That loss felt like losing a part of my foundation. Family is supposed to be where you land when everything else falls apart. When family becomes the source of the fall, there is nowhere familiar to rest. Grief from deception carries anger inside it, but the anger is complicated. It is mixed with longing and disbelief and self-blame. Some days I missed them even while knowing they had hurt me. Some days I felt furious at myself for missing people who betrayed me. Grief does not follow logic. It does not care about what makes sense. It moves according to its own rhythm. I mourned the wedding day differently after the truth came out. What had once been a memory filled with hope became a reminder of what was already broken. I saw the smiles differently. I heard the vows differently. I remembered my sister's tears differently. Grief rewrites memory. It overlays truth onto moments that once felt pure, and that process is painful. It is like watching your past dissolve and reform into something you did not choose. There is also grief in realizing that the happiness you felt was real even if the foundation was not. That realization is unsettling. It means your joy was genuine but misplaced. It means you experienced love and hope honestly even while being deceived. Grieving that kind of joy is strange because you are not sure whether to honor it or resent it. I had to learn that my happiness was not a lie even if the circumstances were. Deception steals your sense of agency. It takes away informed choice. I grieved the fact that I did not get to decide my life with full knowledge. I grieved the version of myself who would have chosen differently if she had known. That grief carried regret even though I knew I was not responsible for the deception. Still the feeling lingered. That is the cruel nature of this kind of loss. It makes you feel complicit in something that was done to you. I isolated myself for a while because I did not know how to explain my grief. How do you tell someone you are mourning a marriage that existed only on the surface? How do you explain that your sister is alive but no longer your sister in the way she once was? Language feels inadequate. People want clear categories: divorce, estrangement, loss. But this grief lived in between those words. There were days when I felt numb. Days when I felt overwhelmed. Days when I felt almost normal and then guilt followed for feeling that way. Grief from deception does not move in a straight line. It loops back on itself. It surprises you. It interrupts moments of peace. It teaches you that healing is not about forgetting but about learning how to carry what happened without letting it consume you. I had to give myself permission to grieve without rushing the process. To grieve without justifying my pain. To grieve even when others expected me to be strong or relieved or angry. Grief does not need permission but it does need space. I learned that pushing it down only made it heavier. Letting it exist allowed it to slowly loosen its grip. There is a loneliness that comes with this kind of grief. You feel separate from people whose lives have not been disrupted in the same way. You feel like you are speaking a different emotional language. That loneliness can make you feel invisible. I learned to sit with that loneliness instead of fighting it. To let it teach me what I needed to know about myself. Over time I began to understand that grief was not my enemy. It was evidence that I had loved deeply. That I had believed in something meaningful. That I had invested my heart fully. Grief honored the part of me that was real, even when others were not. That understanding softened the shame that sometimes accompanied my pain. Deception-based grief eventually changes form. It becomes quieter, less sharp. It settles into a kind of wisdom. It teaches you what matters. It teaches you what you will no longer tolerate. It teaches you how to protect yourself without closing your heart entirely. I learned that grief does not mean weakness. It means truth has landed. It means something mattered. It means you are human. And while this grief came from deception, it did not define me. It passed through me and left behind strength, clarity, and a deeper compassion for myself. Grief does not only come from loss. It comes from deception. And that grief deserves to be acknowledged, honored, and felt fully. Because on the other side of it is not bitterness but understanding. Not hardness but resilience. Not destruction but the quiet rebuilding of a life rooted in truth. Silence is often misunderstood. People think silence means weakness or fear or avoidance. I once believed that too. I believed strength had to be loud and visible and undeniable. I believed standing up for yourself meant explaining everything and making sure your pain was witnessed. Betrayal changed that belief in me. It taught me that silence can be a form of strength when it is chosen and not forced. When I discovered the truth, my first instinct was to scream. To demand answers. To expose everything they had done. To make my pain public so it could be validated. But something inside me hesitated. Something quieter and steadier asked me to pause. There is a difference between silence that is imposed on you and silence that you claim for yourself. The silence I chose was not submission. It was self-preservation. I realized that explaining myself to people who had already betrayed me would not heal me. It would only reopen wounds. I realized that arguing with liars would not give me truth. It would only give them another opportunity to twist it. Silence became my boundary. It was the line I drew to protect what little peace I had left. When you are betrayed, there is a temptation to tell your story immediately. To lay out every detail so others will understand how deeply you were hurt. That urge is natural. We want our pain to be seen. We want acknowledgement. We want justice. But I learned that not everyone deserves access to your wounds. Not everyone will handle your truth with care. Some people will use it as entertainment. Some will use it to take sides. Some will use it to question your choices. Silence allowed me to decide who earned the right to hear my story. My silence was not passive. It was intentional. I stopped answering questions that felt invasive. I stopped defending my decisions. I stopped trying to control the narrative. I let people believe what they wanted to believe. That was one of the hardest parts. Letting go of the need to be understood. Letting go of the desire to correct every assumption. Silence required me to trust that my truth did not need constant explanation to remain valid. There is power in not reacting immediately. Betrayal tries to provoke you. It tries to pull you into chaos where emotions are high and clarity is low. Silence gave me space to think, to feel, to breathe. It slowed everything down enough for me to hear my own voice again. In the quiet I was able to process what had happened without outside noise. I was able to grieve privately. I was able to decide my next steps based on what was best for me rather than what would satisfy my anger. People often confuse silence with forgiveness. They think if you are not shouting you must be excusing what happened. That is not true. Silence does not mean acceptance. It means discernment. It means choosing not to waste energy on conversations that will not lead to healing. I did not forgive immediately. I did not forget. I simply chose not to engage in endless explanations that would drain me further. Silence also protected my dignity. I refused to beg for honesty from people who had already chosen deceit. I refused to plead for remorse from people who had already crossed a line. By staying quiet I kept my self-respect intact. I did not need them to validate my pain. I knew what I experienced was real. That knowledge became enough. There is a quiet confidence that comes from walking away without drama. It unsettles people who expect you to break. It confuses those who rely on your reaction to justify their behavior. My silence forced them to sit with their choices without my emotional labor cushioning the impact. I did not owe them closure. I owed myself peace. In the absence of my voice their actions spoke louder. Truth has a way of revealing itself when you stop trying to explain it. Patterns emerge. Inconsistencies show. Silence removes distractions. It allows reality to stand on its own. I watched as people slowly began to see what I had seen without me saying a word. That was not my goal, but it reinforced my choice. Silence gave me control over my healing. I could choose when to speak and when to rest. I could decide which details to share and which to keep sacred. My story belonged to me. I did not have to give it away to feel whole. That realization was empowering. It reminded me that my worth did not depend on public sympathy. There were moments when silence felt heavy. Moments when words sat in my throat begging to be released. Moments when I wondered if staying quiet meant I was avoiding confrontation. But each time I checked in with myself I knew the truth. I was not afraid. I was intentional. I was choosing my well-being over momentary relief. Silence also taught me patience. Healing does not respond well to urgency. It unfolds in its own time. By not rushing to speak I allowed my emotions to settle. I allowed clarity to replace shock. When I did eventually speak it came from a place of strength rather than pain. My words were measured. My boundaries were clear. I learned that not every battle requires a response. Not every lie deserves correction. Not every betrayal requires explanation. Silence can be the final answer. It can signal that access has been revoked. That the conversation is over. That you are done participating in dynamics that harm you. Choosing silence was one of the hardest things I have ever done because it went against my nature. I am a communicator. I believe in honesty. But this silence was honest too. It was honest about my limits. Honest about my needs. Honest about what I could no longer tolerate. Over time silence transformed into peace. The noise faded. The urgency diminished. I found myself thinking less about what had happened and more about what I wanted next. Silence created space for new possibilities. It allowed me to rebuild without interference. I learned that strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes it walks quietly out of a situation without looking back. Sometimes it closes a door gently but firmly. Sometimes it chooses rest over retaliation. That kind of strength is not flashy, but it is enduring. Silence can be a form of strength when it is rooted in self-respect. When it is guided by clarity. When it is chosen consciously. My silence was not empty. It was full of intention. It held my grief, my resolve, and my healing. And in that silence I found my power again. Healing does not arrive all at once, and it does not arrive gently. It comes in fragments, in small decisions, in quiet moments where you choose yourself even when it feels unfamiliar. After everything fell apart, I did not wake up one morning feeling whole. I woke up feeling tired, confused, and unsure of who I was without the life I had built around other people. Choosing myself was not a single bold act. It was a series of small difficult choices made over and over again when no one was watching. At first, choosing myself felt selfish. I had been raised to believe love meant sacrifice and endurance and patience. I had been taught to prioritize harmony over honesty and loyalty over personal truth. Walking away from people I loved felt like failure. It felt like I was giving up. But staying would have meant abandoning myself completely. Healing required me to unlearn the belief that my worth was tied to how much pain I could tolerate. The first step in choosing myself was acknowledging my pain without minimizing it. I stopped telling myself it could have been worse. I stopped comparing my hurt to others. I stopped excusing what had been done to me. I allowed myself to say this hurt me deeply and that truth mattered. Naming my pain did not make me weak. It made me honest. And honesty became the foundation of my healing. I began to listen to my body in ways I never had before. I noticed how tension lived in my shoulders, how exhaustion sat behind my eyes, how anxiety tightened my chest. My body had been reacting to betrayal long before my mind accepted it. Healing meant slowing down enough to hear those signals. It meant resting without guilt. It meant saying no without explanation. It meant honoring my limits even when others did not understand them. Choosing myself also meant redefining love. I had to let go of the idea that love meant enduring harm. I had to understand that real love does not require you to shrink or stay silent or accept disrespect. Love should feel safe. It should allow you to breathe. It should support your growth, not sabotage it. This realization changed how I viewed every relationship in my life. I began to evaluate connections not by history but by how they made me feel in my body and spirit. There were moments when loneliness tried to pull me back into familiar pain. Familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar peace. I missed the comfort of routine even when it was toxic. Choosing myself meant sitting with that loneliness without running from it. It meant trusting that discomfort was temporary and that peace would eventually feel like home. That trust took time to build, but it grew stronger with each boundary I honored. I learned to forgive myself for staying as long as I did. Self-blame is a heavy barrier to healing. It keeps you stuck in the past, replaying moments and wishing you had known better. I had to remind myself that I made decisions based on love and trust, not foolishness. I did the best I could with the information I had. Forgiving myself freed energy I could finally use to move forward. Choosing myself required me to get comfortable with disappointing others. This was one of the hardest lessons. I was used to being the peacemaker, the reliable one, the person who held things together. When I stopped performing that role, some people reacted with confusion or anger. Healing taught me that their discomfort was not my responsibility. I did not need to sacrifice my well-being to maintain their comfort. I began to build a life that centered my needs rather than my obligations. I asked myself what I wanted without filtering it through other people's expectations. I paid attention to what brought me calm rather than chaos. I created routines that grounded me. Simple things like quiet mornings, walks alone, journaling without censorship. These practices were not dramatic, but they were transformative. They helped me reconnect with myself. There were setbacks. Days when grief resurfaced unexpectedly. Days when anger flared. Days when doubt crept in. Healing is not linear, and choosing yourself does not mean you never struggle. It means you meet those struggles with compassion rather than judgment. When I stumbled, I reminded myself that progress is not erased by difficult days. Each choice to return to myself mattered. I also learned to trust again, slowly and intentionally. Choosing myself did not mean closing my heart permanently. It meant protecting it wisely. I allowed people into my life based on consistency and respect rather than promises. I watched actions instead of words. Trust became something built over time rather than given freely. This shift brought a sense of safety I had never known before. As I healed, I noticed a quiet strength emerging. I spoke more honestly. I tolerated less disrespect. I felt more grounded in my decisions. I was no longer seeking validation for my boundaries. I trusted myself to know what was right for me. That confidence was not loud, but it was steady. It came from surviving something that could have broken me and choosing not to let it define me. Choosing myself also meant allowing joy back in without guilt. For a long time I felt guilty for laughing or enjoying life. As if happiness somehow betrayed the seriousness of what I had been through. Healing taught me that joy is not disrespectful to pain. It is evidence of resilience. Allowing myself to feel joy again was a powerful act of self-love. I began to imagine a future that was not shaped by betrayal. A future built on truth, boundaries, and mutual respect. That vision gave me hope. It reminded me that my life was not over. It was simply changing direction. Choosing myself meant believing that I deserved a life filled with honesty and peace. The most important lesson healing taught me was that I am allowed to be the center of my own life. Not in a selfish way, but in a grounded, intentional way. I am allowed to prioritize my mental, emotional, and physical well-being. I am allowed to walk away from what harms me. I am allowed to rebuild at my own pace. Healing begins when you choose yourself, not once but repeatedly. In moments of doubt, in moments of fear, in moments when old patterns try to pull you back. Each time you choose yourself, you reinforce the truth that your life matters. Your peace matters. Your healing matters. I did not choose the betrayal, but I chose my response to it. I chose to heal. I chose to grow. I chose to reclaim my life. And in that choice I found a strength I never knew I had. Choosing myself was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a life rooted in truth, dignity, and self-respect.